I have the honor to be the last one this year, and in September, as you heard, classes will resume. And Bezat Hashem, we will meet on occasions next year.
Look forward.
So we're now in the second part. If you remember, we had two classes about the chiyuv of Torah learners to serve in the army. That was 2 classes. And the plan, and we're going according to the plan, is to have 2 classes about hostage release deals, if, how, and under what conditions. And we started it last week, and now we're completing it, Bezrat Hashem. So I'll just say the main points of last week's orally. We're not going to read the sources again inside, of course. This is why we had a class last week. We looked at the sources and tried to draw out of them some parameters for our discussions. And the first one was that definitely our sources, starting from the Gemara and Bava Batra, followed by the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, meaning our halachic code books, say that redeeming captives and hostages is considered a mitzvah rabbah, a very, very big mitzvah, and actually the highest level of tzedakah, meaning giving money for that will enable to release hostages should take the top priority. The Gemara also explained that the reason why, the Gemara gave the explanation, the reason why redeeming captives is considered mitzvah rabbah is because it is, in a sense, worse than anything. It includes famine, death, everything is included there. Okay? So that was the first vector, the first parameter that should be taken into consideration when we discuss such a topic. The second one was the Mishnah that said in Gittin, that said clearly that our sages made a decree or established a takana that you don't overpay, whatever that means, you don't overpay in order to release hostages. Now the Gemara, as we have seen, was in a doubt that the Gemara didn't resolve. Why? What was behind that decree? Is it because the community can't afford gigantic amounts? Or is it because by overpaying, you're actually encouraging the mafia to further on kidnap? And therefore, even if you have the money, you should not do it. Looking at the future. By the way, here is a shtickle comment regarding something that was quoted again by our beloved Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef. After we endorsed him for his wise statements about yeshiva bachar serving in the army. So also regarding our topic, he said something that is true from a certain perspective halachically, that when you have a life danger that is current and you have a potential, how will I say it, speculative, yeah. You have I was just translating from the Hebrew word speculativi to the English word speculative. So, which is pretty amazing. So, Hebrew is such a rich language. So what happens is that he said that if you have a certain speculative life danger and you have now a 100% current, then of course you prefer the current one. He said it in the context of hostage release deals. So I'm just pointing out, first of all, it's a true statement in general. Everyone agrees. Specifically here, the rabbis did think about future problems because the rabbis here made a decree. You have a captive, you still don't redeem him, if it's overpaying because of potential kidnapping. So you see that the sages did do that cheshbon of future. So that's my shtickle comment on his statement. It should be taken into consideration, but with all the complexity. That's what I'm saying, okay? Let's put it this way. It is less problematic than his statements about leaving the country if yeshiva. Okay, I'll give him that credit. At any rate, we have both of these vectors. Okay, on the one hand, clearly it's a very important value in Jewish tradition and halacha, redeeming captives. On the other hand, also we see considerations in the sources itself of being aware of future consequences of doing an irresponsible deal. Okay? So these are two parameters that we saw clearly. Okay? We pointed out, people here by themselves pointed out the valid point that all of these sources are not bringing any conclusive absolute proofs to our case from either direction, simply because they're not talking about the same situation. They're talking about a community in the exile or not in the exile that is dealing with mafia that are asking for money. Okay, you note the clear differences. We're talking here about a war of a sovereign state where hostages are part of the war, and that we're asked to release terrorists, which is not money, okay? But most important, we're talking about a war. And since we're talking about a context of a war and a government that is running a war, our government, so the considerations are from all different directions, even to some, when the bottom line could be conflicting, meaning on the one hand, you need to win the war and you can't give the enemy advantages in the war or feeling like they won the war. It's important for national security. On the other hand, you need the people to be behind, our people to be behind you in the war. There is a value of the nation being united and to boost the morale of the nation in order that we'll be able to continue to fight the war. So that could be from another side. Okay? A. B. Let's say soldiers. I mentioned it in the context of the Jibril, which was in the 80s. The Jibril deal. Some rabbi said, the government violated the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Gittin, because they released 1,000 terrorists for 8 soldiers, so that means that you overpaid. Now let's assume that they're even correct, that it still, definitely as we said, the government maybe was wrong, but the government didn't violate a halacha here. Why? Because it's a different case. Because we're not talking about people that were kidnapped and now you have to pay to release them. You're talking about soldiers that you have some responsibility because they're your shlichim. So that's a total different case. And on the other hand, one could say, well, a soldier is even willing to sacrifice his life. So that now here, in our case, we're bichlal talking about some of what we're talking about is about civilians that the country has responsibility for. Okay? Because it was the country's task to protect them, etc. It's not that they went on a trip and they were not responsible and then they were kidnapped. That's not the case here. Okay? So all of these considerations should be taken, and what is clear is that you can't copy-paste the source and say that's the halacha. Okay? What we took from there is that we have two parameters that we see clearly in the sources. A, the very high value of releasing captives because they suffer a lot. And on the other hand, being aware of potential future consequences. Now, after we said that, we reached the point where the Gemara in Gittin, another Gemara in Gittin, presented the case of Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha that was kidnapped and was in captive, not kidnapped, was in captive as part of the war against the Romans, was captive, was in captivity, was imprisoned by the Romans, and that Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananiah was next to the prison, and he made a certain test, like he said a pasuk, and he said the continuation of it. By the way, it's not a neutral pasuk; it has a meaning, but we're not learning this agada. Okay, and then he said and did that I will release him in exchange to all the money that they will ask me. Yeah, kol mamon sheposkin alav. Now that clearly contradicts the Mishnah in Gittin and the Gemara in Gittin that was only 13 pages before. Meaning there is a Mishnah in Gittin says that you don't overpay. And here Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananiah says clearly that he will overpay in order to release Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. And that's what he did. It's not only that he said that, he did that. And the Gemara ends by saying, and indeed Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha became a big scholar. Because when he was willing to pay any price, he said, I am sure and confident that this guy will become a gadol. So there is a clear contradiction between these two sources. I'm sorry. Well, okay.
Just two questions. The first, the painful question is we don't know how many hostages are still alive.
So we don't know. You're right.
Secondly, in the past, we know these hostage releases have caused they've released serious people who have gone on to perform pretty.
The 2 points are true, but the 2 points are true, but they're not leading to any absolute conclusion.
Right.
And we'll see that. Okay, so thank you. There are many other points that I didn't mention, and these. Yes, we're not sure how many are alive. That's true. Yes, there is a difference between what you're willing to pay for in my humble eyes, for living people and for.
There's a most aren't alive, and you've got a whole country you're going to produce.
What?
If unfortunately most of them aren't alive or whatever. Then releasing all these terrorists who are going to...
Okay, I think that we have pretty good, by the way, regarding that concern, I think we have pretty good intelligence that gives you the main margin, the main of how many are alive. We definitely know that some are alive, we definitely know that some are dead, and we know what is the suffix also, and we're making these cheshbonot. Now, let's see the Tosfot in Gittin. So the Tosfot in Gittin confronts the question, the contradiction between these two sources that I just mentioned. And the Tosfos in Gittin says the following, Ki ika sakanach nefashot, pidyon shpodin shvuyim yater al kedei dmehen. So Tosfos' first answer, and I'm just warning you, don't protest against this answer, because most Rishonim dismiss that answer, Ramban and others, because it's problematic. So we'll see, but we need to say, what is Tosfos' answer? Tosfos is saying that when there is a life danger to the hostage, to the captive, then we do overpay. That's his halachic opinion. And as you understand, that has a direct implication, let's say, to our case. So he says, so Tosfos in his first answer minimizes very much that decree of the sages not to overpay. Because he says, all of what they were talking about, not to overpay the mafia, is only when there is no life danger to the captive. But if there is life danger to the captive, you do overpay. And what he says is that here, Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananiah's assessment was that Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha was indeed in a life danger, and therefore he overpaid. Right, but I'm sure, but I'm still saying that is a consideration that is written here. Now, now the thing is, I'm sorry. Now the thing is that the problem with this answer, as we'll see, is the source that said that Pidyon Shvuim is mitzvah rabbah clearly said that there is a life danger. A. B. Almost every captive, or many captives, are in life danger. So it seems a little weird that this takana was not talking about a case where the captive is in life danger. But we'll see there are even more problems with this answer. But that's the first answer. The second answer, inami. The second answer, mishum de muflag bechochma haya. Meaning, since Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha, this kid, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, detected that he is way extraordinary with the potential to become a Gdol Hador, so when this is at stake, you do overpay. Meaning there are some considerations, and here I don't want to say some considerations because I want to say just the consideration that is brought here in halacha. If this is someone that is a Gdol Dor, okay, then you do overpay. These are the two answers. A, the decree didn't relate to a case where there is a life danger to the captive. Second answer of Tosfot, if we're talking about Gdol Hador, meaning Am Yisrael needs badly this guy, okay, then you do overpay. Now, as I promised you, the first answer of Tosfos, some of the most Rishonim were not happy with that first answer. And let's see, V'yesh Omrim, it's the Ramban. Yeah, Ramban, Nachmanides, he comments on it. V'yesh Omrim, Dekol Heicha De'ika Chashasha Demita. Some are saying, it's the last two rows in the first page. And some are saying, Dekol Heicha, everywhere that there is a concern, Demita, that the captive, first page, last row. Okay? ויש אומר, דכל איכה דאיקה חששה דמיתה, פודין אותם בכל ממון שיכולים לפדותם. Yeah, that's Tosfos. He quotes Tosfos' opinion that if there is a chashash that the captive will die in captivity, then you pay any money that is required. ולא מסתבר. Ramban reject that. Says that doesn't make sense, what Tosfos says. דכל שבי כולו ייתנו בי. Because every captivity, the Gemara says, includes everything, including death. That was the argument the Gemara gave to explain why captivity and redeeming is so important. Ve'od, he says, furthermore, Degabe Isham, the first line if you flip the page, Degabe Isha, Ika Chashasha de'arayot, ve'lo chasheshu. When a woman is in captivity, there is unfortunately a danger that her dignity is violated, etc. And still, you don't overpay. And even though היה להם לחוש. ומסתברא, and now he says, therefore what seems to me, תלמיד חכם פודין אותו בכל מקום שבעולם. A tremendous תלמיד חכם, you pay everything for him. וליקה משום דוחקה. ולא משום היגועי. And the concerns that was brought in the decree, meaning too much burden on the community or future potential kidnapping, are moved away in such a case. שאם איבדו ישראל ממון, או מתו משונאיהם הרבה, יש לנו כיוצא בהם. Because even if the people of Israel are losing a lot of money, or even unfortunately, God forbid, they lose a lot of lives, we still have Jews. But Talmud Chacham, אין לנו כיוצא בו. But such a exceptional scholar, let's say like Rabbi Ishmael ben Leah, we don't have any like him. וקודם לפדות למלך, and he even takes priority before redeeming a king. Okay, hilkach. Okay, and Rabbi Yoshua detected him and recognized him that he is an exceptional Talmud Chacham that has no replacement. Okay, now let's look at the Tosfos in Gittin. Now Tosfos gives a third consideration. So we saw first consideration, you overpay when there is life danger. We saw that the Ramban disagrees with it. You don't overpay even when there is a life danger to the captive. That was one. And then we saw another parameter. If he's someone that has no replacement, he is then you do overpay. And now we'll see a third consideration that seems most relevant. Again, when I say relevant, I don't mean that it's halacha l'maisa, copy paste. I mean it's a vector that has relevance to our discussion. ולא לגרבו ולהיטיב, דתניא בפרק נערה נשבית, והיו מבקשים ממנה עד 10 בדמי הפעם ראשון פודה. שייני אשתו דהביה כגופו יותר מביתו. דהכה. ועל עצמו לא תקנו שלא ייתן כל אשר לו בעד נפשו. Look at the bold letters that I said, ועל עצמו לא תקנו שלא ייתן כל אשר לו בעד נפשו. Tosfot claims that when a person has money to redeem himself, he's a billionaire, he's a multi-billionaire, okay, and he has any money to redeem himself, that decree of the sages not to overpay is not valid. No one will prevent him from redeeming himself, even if it encourages future kidnaps. The sages did not limit a person for fighting for his own life. Meaning there is a difference between when the community fundraise in order to release someone, and when a person is trying to rescue himself, to run away himself. That we will never limit. Okay? That's what and then the next step, why is Tosfot saying this? In order to resolve, again, a contradiction between this time a Gemara and Ketuvot that I didn't bring, and that decree. Because in the Gemara Ketuvot it says that a husband, now we came to the romantic part, as we know, one of the obligation of a husband to a wife in Torah is redeeming her. And there is no limit. Again, and why there is no limit? Because ishto kegufo, they are viewed as one person. So just as we will never limit a person in rescuing himself, we will also never limit a husband for extra paying, overpaying for his wife.
What about the rest of the family?
What?
What about the rest of the family?
No, that's what he makes a distinction between a daughter and a wife, but we won't go into it now. ורבי שוב בן חנניה, דפרקי לעלות תינוק בממון הרבה, לפי שהיה מופלג בכורה. Now he deals with our old contradiction with Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Shua ben Chana. So the first answer he gives is he's an extraordinary Talmud Chacham that has no replacement. And now he gives another answer. Inami, that's the bold letters at the end of the source. Inami, bishat churban habayit, lo shayach delo ligrebu. Very interesting answer that could bear several meanings. He says, when did he do that, Rabbi Yoshua, this overpayment? Right after the Churban, right? It was he was in a Roman captive after the Churban. When there is a Churban, then there is no cheshbon of encouraging them to for future kidnapping. Meaning, what he says, hey, the Mishnah in Gittin spoke about mafia and not encouraging the mafia, not overpaying, but this case is totally different. This case is not a kidnapping by a mafia. It's a kidnapping that happened in a war, and now the war is over, and therefore there is no problem that he will overpay. Now this is an interesting answer, because this A proves our point, which is very simple and intuitive anyhow, that you can't take copy-paste one case to another case. Here you see that Tosfot says, look, the Mishnah in Gittin with the decree talked about a mafia that is ongoing kidnapping, and therefore you make the cheshbon of preventing future kidnapping. But in Shat Churban HaBayit, that's it. The war is over. The Romans are not about kidnapping Jewish kids. This guy, Rabbi Shmuel, this kid was taken as a captive of war. And we lost already the war there. The war is over. It's not that by overpaying now they will kidnap more because the Roman Empire is not a mafia. It's just an army that took some Jewish boys as captives. That's all. So you see that he makes that cheshbon. By the way, we could have also said that he says, and we can just war is a different thing for any direction, as we just said. Oh, as we said in the beginning. Next Tosfot.
Oh wait, but he overpaid.
He overpaid, but that's exactly what he's saying. That the whole decree not to overpay.
Yeah,
No. Listen. No. Just listen till the end, please. And then, if you have a question, please ask. The Mishnah in Gittin says, don't overpay. The Gemara gives two explanations, and the Gemara is not certain which one is correct. A, the decree is in order not to overburden the community. B, alternatively, the decree is in order not to further encourage future kidnapping. Okay? That was, all right. Says Tosfot, in the case of Rabbi Ishmael, the kid that was in Roman captivity, both arguments are not valid in his eyes. Okay? Therefore, the decree is not applied there. Therefore, he can overpay. Okay, why are they not valid? It wasn't a burden in the community. Okay, he had the money, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah. A, the cheshbon of encouraging future kidnapping is not valid because the Romans are not by overpaying them, you're not encouraging them now to kidnap Jewish kids for money because that's not what they're engaged in. That's not their business. They're not mafia. This kid was just taken as a captive of war, which is now over. That's all. Okay, now what is your question?
No, my question was that it's very. So then it says that you're allowed to overpay.
Sure, that's exactly what it says.
In a war situation.
Nachon? That's right, exactly.
So now we're in a war situation.
So I'm saying.
And we can.
Right.
You can overpay
But
or not.
still, there are very, very important distinctions here. So you can't say. Does it open the door to what's called overpaid? I already said it last week. Yes, let's say the Jibril Treaty, when Rabbi said, hey, you violated the Mishnah in Gittin, and you overpaid. So my Rabbi Rav Amital said, no, the government didn't violate it. Maybe the government was wrong, but it didn't violate halacha here. So first of all, yes, you're right. But please note, we're all the time, as was noted here before by your neighbor, overpaying here talks all the time about money. We're talking here about total different things. Wow. Very, very important distinction. That's A. B, specifically there, one can argue that what Tosfot says is not just, if there's a war, there is a cash, how do you say cash, there's a term in English that I don't know. Cash blind, whatever.
Open register.
Here, the logic is that the war is over, and since the war is over, and the Romans are not they don't have a business of kidnapping kids. Just that's a leftover from the war, so you could overpay him. Now we're in a war, and you understand that by overpaying, maybe you're deteriorating the war because the war is not over. So you see, so you need to be very careful when you apply even that Tosfot to our case. At any rate, Tosfot and Ktubot says, another Tosfot in it, all right, no. Here, I won't even read it inside. Tosfot just reiterates what he wrote in Gittin, that even according to the reason that we don't want to encourage future kidnapping, even according to that argument, no one will limit a person to redeem himself and overpay for himself. Okay? Beseder. Now let's look at the Radvaz. I love this Radvaz. I'll tell you why. But first of all, let's see. Who is the Radvaz? Briefly?
Yeah. Egypt.
No. Thank you. And I'm very happy that you said that because we're not talking about that Radvaz. We're talking, there are two Radvaz. So actually, he's cooperating. I asked him to say that, so that the Radvaz, the first Radvaz was a contemporary, a little later, but of the Shulchan Aruch, not exactly contemporary, slightly out. The Radvaz, so you understand, it's way before. So we're talking about someone that was way before, 200 years ago, okay? He was a little bit after an injunctions to the Shulchan Aruch. You could find them in some of the volumes of Maimonides, the code book, Mishnah Torah. So we have Kesef Mishnah, Lechem Mishnah, we have the commentaries on Maimonides, on the Mishnah Torah. So in Magid Mishnah, right? Magid Mishnah and Kesef Mishnah is the Shulchan Aruch himself. And in some of them we have Radvaz on the side. So this is the Radvaz we're talking about, Rabbi David ben Zimra. So the Radvaz is saying the following, Vein Tomar, and that in his responsa, volume 1 and chapter 40, Tshuva 40, and it's important even historically to see this Radvaz. I'll explain you what significance some of the significance I take from it. V'im tomar, harei anu ro'im שפודין אותם יותר לכדי דמי שער השבויים ומעשים בכל יום כן וכל המרבה להתעסק במצווה זו הרי זה משובח. This is so nice or interesting. The Radvaz just tells us, reports to us that there is a Mishnah in Gittin that says don't overpay. But Am Yisrael traditionally doesn't pay attention to that Mishnah. He says we saw on a daily basis, almost a daily basis, thank God it's not a daily basis, but maisim b'chol yom, that's a term in halacha, meaning we see that ordinarily the Jews are overpaying. Meaning he's saying we see a direct clash, a contradiction between the decree of the Mishnah and the practice. The practice is that Yidden are opening their wallets, and when you have a Jew that is in captivity, they break the world, and they do anything in order that will be released. And kol amar b'leitasek b'mitzvah zo harei ze meshubach, and it is a praiseworthy mitzvah. And you see that I put his question in bold letters. Because it shows you that there is something in the Jewish DNA, and we should be proud of it. And by the way, when I'm saying it's not that I'm saying do an unresponsible deal. I'm not now preaching for that. I'm just stating that we should understand that there is very ancient roots to this Jewish DNA, Jewish impulse. To be very, very caring and paying high prices in order to release hostages, it's part of our Jewish DNA. It's part of our arvus, okay? And we should be proud of it. It's part of our koach and sensitivity and camaraderie and arvus between Jews. But he asked the question. Let's see how he deals with the question. He says, I see contradiction between the decree and the practice, the common practice. And he says, V'yesh lomar, and I'll answer, Desamchu lahem al echad migimel o dalet te'amim. He says, they make 3 or 4 arguments to get away from the decree that limits them from overpaying. One is that there is a goy that we do pay, that people are paying this high price. And even though this goy is very strong and therefore they're overpaying, and this Jew is a weak person, no, we're just paying very, very high prices that are paid in the market. That's one. Inam shema yesh betocham chacham. Perhaps there is a big Talmud Chacham there that we have already seen that we're paying every price for him. Or even if it's not a Talmud Chacham, if someone could potentially become a Talmud Chacham, we will redeem in any money. Or perhaps they have some minors, that these minors are at risk that they will be forced to become non-Jews. And therefore we're not releasing him. We're actually saving from something that will be violate the religion. And even though he says, one can argue and says, no, even taking all these considerations, the Tana still said, don't overpay. See, he understands that these are weak answers. He says, I'm now in a struggle to resolve a contradiction that I see between common practice of Am Yisrael and the simple meaning of the source that contradicts
the
it.
price?
Wait a minute. Still the Tana said, still we will answer that maybe that the Tana didn't speak about Shvuyim that have all of these considerations that we said. And since this is a suffix, here again, bold letters. You see the bold letters towards the end of the source. V'kevan shadavar safek, hanach lehem liYisrael. And since you can make maybe all kinds of kvetchlach, just leave the people of Israel to continue with this practice of overpaying. V'yachziku b'midah, and they should hold to that position and trait. Kevan shem smechim v'sasim ba, because they're happy when they save a Jew. V'yesh lahem bazeh sachar gadol. And furthermore, and they have big reward for it. Again, please note, he's talking about money. Again, about money and not anything else. Vetu she'ein anu kofin otam elahem be'atzmam mitnavim. Furthermore, we don't enforce anyone to do this. They're volunteering to do that. By the way, here is again a distinction here. When there is a deal that will chas v'shalom risk lives of soldiers and civilians from future terrorists. So you are coercing people to do things that they disagree with, because a substantial portion of the population will be against such deals. Therefore, it's great. U'mitzvah raba'ika, and it's a big mitzvah, and it's very nice that they're following the midah of Avraham Avinu, because it says Nedivei Amim, to be generous, Am Elokei Avraham. So he's talking about generosity, and about generosity with money, of course. But, so therefore, it's less relevant to our case. But the thing that is relevant is that here you have a testimony by Radvaz that an ancient Jewish DNA is to violate the Mishnah. Okay? Because they're so passionate to save a Jew, because of the DNA of Jews of being ba'arvus. Now, when we're going to a case of a war, now let's look at some sources. Because also I see the time. Let's see Rav Yisraeli. Rav Yisraeli, Zecher Tzaddik Lavracha, was a tremendous scholar. He was a religious Zionist rabbi and a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He was a Rosh Yeshiva in Merkaz Harav, and was a Dayan in the Supreme Beit Din Gadol. He was sitting next to Rabbi Ovadia, and there was mutual respect, despite the differences of views on several issues, as we know. And here is what Rav Yisraeli writes. He's talking about making deals in order to release soldiers, okay? Like the Jibril deal that I mentioned, Ahmed Jibril deal that I mentioned, that was done in the 80s by Shamir and Rabin, okay? Releasing 1,000 terrorists for 8 soldiers, or 6 soldiers, I don't remember. Kevan, says Rav Yisraeli, Kevan she'ele chayaleinu, since our soldiers, יצאו למלחמה בשליחות המדינה ומטעמה. They went to the war on behalf of the state. And on behalf of this, and were sent by the state and for the state in order to protect להגנת העם היושב בציון, to protect the people that are residing in Zion. הרי קיימת ועומדת התחייבות בלתי כתובה. Therefore there is some unwritten covenant, some written contract, some written contract, commitment between the country and its soldiers. But even though it's not written, it's self-evident. שכל תצדקי שיש בידי המדינה עליה לעשות, that everything that the state could do in order to release them, they should do. And now he adds, important bit, בגבולות סבירים, in reasonable boundaries, שאינם פוגעים בביטחונה הכללי, that are not violating the general security of the state. So you see, he says any price, but then he obviously limits it and says, of course, not risking the general security of the state. I mentioned, in order to crystallize the discussion, I said it many times, when you were discussing complicated topics, there is this technique of redicito to absurdum, meaning you make the most extreme case in order to show that things are not absolute. I said, when someone is saying, release the hostages in any price, unlimited. So I'm asking, so let's say, Sinwar says, fine, if there's no Jewish sovereign state, just no Jewish sovereign state at all. There will be here an Islamic, you agree to be, you know what, we don't even shecht all of you. Those who want to stay here to live under a Muslim regime are welcome. Anyone else should take ships and airplanes and go. And I'm releasing all the hostages. Every single one of them. I assume that even the ones that are screaming in any price will agree that that's a price that the state cannot pay. Okay? So that was just to illustrate a point. So here, Rabbi Israeli is saying, there is an unwritten commitment of a state towards its soldiers because the soldiers are the shlichim. They went on behalf of the state, were sent by the state. So there is a special commitment here. More, he implies, more than, let's say, a community that someone went on an irresponsible trip and was kidnapped by some mafia. It's a totally different ballgame. But he says, of course, you should do it in reasonable boundaries that are not that will not harm the national the general national security. כדי לפנותם במקרה שיפלו בשבי. וכשם שקיימת התחייבות, and just as there is a commitment when they're chas v'shalom harmed in a war, you have the same commitment to release them from captivity, because as we know, in captivity is the worst. He quotes here the Gemara, includes all the tortures, and therefore, since the state accepted it upon himself in exchange to their service, now here are the bold letters, הרי אין זה אלא כאילו הם פודים את עצמם. Look at his creativity halachically. He says, we saw in Tosfos that one is allowed to pay any price to redeem himself, and that the decree doesn't apply. So he says, if there are shlichim, it's really, when we're overpaying, it's really what? It's really as if they are redeeming themselves. Therefore, the Mishnah and the decree are not relevant to the case. שבזה מבואר שאין שום הגבלה ולא שייכת התקנה. ונראה, I'm 2 lines before the end, שכשם שהרשות נתונה ליחיד לסכן עצמו בפקודה, just as an individual is allowed, now he goes to the next step, and he speaks not only about money. Let's see how he does that with his creativity. He says, no, I'm saying it in a positive way. He's saying, part of what the Mishnah says, that a person is allowed to overpay in order to redeem himself. He's also allowed to risk himself in order to save himself. Meaning he could take upon himself risks because he's trying to save himself. He says, just as the individual has a permission halachically to take risks in order to escape from captivity, So also the government can do that, because really the government is like saving itself, because the soldiers are the shlichim of the government. And therefore the government has the right, halachically, to do negotiation releasing terrorists. And even though there is a serious doubt here, I'm in the beginning of the third page, that maybe that will cause potential speculative future violence, meaning that saving these soldiers could be involved in some safek nefashot of future people. The government, as being elected by the public, has the authority, here you have the bold letter, hasamchut beyada, to do everything that an individual is allowed to do to save himself. Because she was giving the authority, to decide any decision as a representative, an agent of the entire tzibur. Therefore, the agreement of a government is not violating any halacha in Torah. So Rav Israeli, don't be wrong. He doesn't say that he's for a certain deal or he's against a certain deal. He's just saying any rabbi that is saying when a government signs a deal that involves releasing some terrorists, and that is violated the Mishnah, that says there is a decree not to overpay, it's wrong. It's just wrong. The government, he actually says one argument. I think it's unnecessary. I'll explain why. In his creativity, he wanted to put it in a certain halachic formulation as a good halachist. That's what you should do. So he says, I see that the Rishonim are clearly saying that when one redeems himself, the decree is not valid. I claim that when the government does anything, it is equivalent to redeeming yourself, because the soldiers and the government is one. Okay? That's very nice. I personally think that it's a little unnecessary even. Meaning his point is valid even without that creative cheshbon. Simply put, the sources there talk about paying money. We're not talking about mafia and about mafia and about money and about community. We're talking about a government, about a war. Okay, the whole case is different from many directions, and soldiers. And therefore, his point is right, that the soldiers are our shlichim, and therefore you could view it as one redeems himself. But even if you won't say that point, that's what I meant by it, saying that his point is unnecessary. You don't need to make the effort to somehow explain that when a government does something, it's like the individual doing something. They're not talking about cases of war and considerations of war. And yes, he is right, not because of this source, but because of other sources, that regarding running a war, we've seen that in our first series this year, the series that I gave in January or whatever, I don't remember. The body that has the halachic authority to decide regarding issues of war is the government. It's very, very simple. Because the government is like the melech. Now, let's look at Rav Kamenetsky. Rav Kamenetsky, he's the rabbi that was in Gush Katif. He says the following. De'ein ha'cheshbon hazeh tzodek bichlal. דכל האחדינה דפדיון שבויים ליתא אלא בשעת שלום. אבל בשעת מלחמה אי אפשר לומר שמחויבים להפסיק מללחום על מנת לפדות את השבויים בממון. I just want to point out that all of these sources were written well before the war, our war. Okay? Therefore, the discussion is about soldiers, etc. As I said, in our case, there's also another variable, and that is the extra commitment the extra obligation, the extra covenant, however you want to call it, towards protecting your citizens. Because soldiers, on the one hand, we have special responsibility towards them, clearly more than stam a not responsible civilian that is kidnapped, like let's say Elchanan Tenenbaum, okay, that Sharon still insisted to release him. But Elchanan Tenenbaum, that's like the bottom priority in that sense, because he's just an individual that acted not responsibly. Okay? Then you have a soldier. Soldier, he's our shaliach. So you have a special obligation towards him. But on the other hand, the soldier also is a soldier. He agreed, as being a soldier, to risk his life, to fight for the country. Okay? Then you have a civilian that was in Nir Oz or in Be'eri or whatever. That civilian, he didn't act not responsible. And he is not a soldier that has an obligations of a soldier. Meaning to sacrifice his life, as a soldier, etc. So you have, that could be viewed as the top level of obligation. Let's see Rav Kamenetsky here. Because all of this din of Pidyon Shvuyim is only at the time of peace. But at time of war, you can't say, here's the bold letters, If Shalomah, the bold letters, If Shalomah in the third page, that one is obligated to stop fighting in order to release the captives by money. Because you could then actually helping the enemy to beat you in the war. Because by giving big money to the enemy, they would further on arm themselves and continue and even intensify the war against you. Again, I don't want to go into the details that he's about the case that he's speaking about. I'm just saying the principle here is clear. When you're in a war, when you're in a context of a war, all the considerations change. Okay? If the enemy will see that as a victory, a hostage release, it could be a problem. If you want to strengthen, let's say the first deal that was done in December, the first deal that was done. In retrospective, again, here people might argue with me, and okay, that I'm not speaking now as a rabbi. I'm now speaking as a simple civilian that has his own opinion, that is as good as the opinion of anyone here. I'm just saying that in my humble eyes, in retrospective, this deal was a good deal in the sense that it was very needed at that point to further unite the people. I'm not talking about. I just need to be clear. First and foremost, okay, lives were saved and we're grateful, and that's great. Yeah, but when I'm speaking strategically in terms of considerations of running a war, okay. So a government now says, how do I run the war in the most effective way and increase the chances that I'll beat the enemy? So a legitimate consideration is now if this deal will strengthen the standing and the backing of the Israeli public, that's a very important consideration. Of course, that's not an unlimited consideration. You have to balance it with other considerations. But I'm saying it's a valid. This is a cheshbon that is totally not relevant in the sources in Gittin and because they're not talking about such scenarios. Okay, now let's see what Michael Vigoda says. Kni'ah ledrishot ha'oyev. Michael Vigoda. Who is Dr. Michael Vigoda? He lives very close by. Michael Vigoda is a scholar in Mishpat Ivri. He replaced Professor Nachum Rakover. He's in Misrad HaMishpatim. Tachlis, he's a koilelnik. He's a big Talmud Chacham. Okay? He writes a lot of articles regarding Jewish law. And now he writes regarding deals. Surrendering and accepting the demands of the enemy to release terrorists in order to release captives, again, he wrote this many years ago, are not only a painful payment, but it's also losing in the battle. We have to. Now he's not talking about the immediate and potential danger in terms of what will these specific terrorists do. He's talking about he's talking about a much more global thing. He's saying, I frame it as a war, and a deal that is too much, okay, is losing in the battle. There is a mitzvah to fight an enemy that comes upon Israel. And therefore, you have special halachic principles that have public nature. And therefore, you don't look at the saving of an individual the same way as when you do a public cheshbon. You're talking about the victory of the country or the loss of the country. In a milchemet mitzvah, the individual has to be moser his nefesh to the saving of the klal. According to these principles, you should not surrender you should not give in to the enemy in order for private interest, no matter how precious it is. This is a universal, fundamental rule, klal, in running a war. A leader that is not acting upon this general rule, meaning making a distinction between a private price, even if it's very precious, and the national good, could chas v'shalom cause his nation to lose. This is true regarding soldiers. You see, now he is arguing really regarding that statement. There is an unwritten covenant, etc., which is true, but he just wants to show the other side. Every soldier is obligated to risk his life in order to defend his country. So how come when the soldier is in captivity, then you should endanger all the country to release him? That's absurd. He went to the war. His shlichut, his obligation is to risk his private life for the national security. So now we will, in order to release this private soldier, we will risk the entire country? That doesn't make sense, he says. Since releasing captives in exchange to releasing terrorists is not an isser and is not an obligation, therefore, the ones who should decide regarding it is, as we said again and again, the government. Having said that, since the demands of the kidnappers are in a context of a national clash, war between us and terror organizations, so the considerations that the government should do is the considerations of a sovereign state that is in a state of war. And in his eyes, since agreeing to the demands of these terrorist organizations will be perceived as a losing in a war, one cannot accept it. Now again, he spoke not about our case, he spoke years and years ago. I'm just taking here the rhetoric and the considerations, and to show also the complexity regarding saying soldiers. Soldiers, it's a complex thing. On the one hand, Rabbi Israeli is right, and Vigoda doesn't disagree with him. Soldiers are our shlichim, and we have a special commitment towards them. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, a soldier, part of his mission is to risk his life for the general public. So these are the two sides of the coin, by the way, which is not true regarding these civilians in Be'eri. At any rate, just his comment regarding this soldier, and then I'll have to say the last source, and I see I'm over time, so we need to finish. I'm just saying, Ben Zussman, Hashem Yinkom Damo, as some of you know, he wrote to his family, I require you not to pay prices for definitely not releasing my body. I know that I said to my family, I was in Miluim for more than 20 years, and I'm a paratrooper. I said, my body is not worth one terrorist that will be released, with all the respect. With all the respect. And then I said, that's A. B, but that's my personal opinion. I was even willing to write it. Even if I'm alive, since I'm a soldier, so the country should do only what is responsible with all, and don't make protests about the unwritten covenant and that we v'chulei. Here, you say, the soldiers won't fight. We hear that read. They won't fight if they won't know that the country will do anything in order to release them. Well, I humbly disagree. Make a survey, interview the soldiers that are going. If they won't fight, so part of the rhetoric is definitely problematic, even though there is a core truth only in one point. Yes, there is a special commitment. Yeah, there is a special commitment because there are shlichim. Okay, and it should be done, as Rabbi Israeli said, in a responsible way. I want to just end with Shmuel Zakkai. Who is Shmuel Zakkai? Shmuel Zakkai, I see though, that's terrible, so I'll just say, Shmuel Zakkai was a chief general in the south, in Gaza, years ago. And Shmuel Zakkai, if you remember that incident in Philadelphia years ago, when there were bodies of soldiers, and Arik Sharon was their prime minister, and there was a certain even military action risking lives of soldiers to release the bodies. Okay? So now Zakkai says, and again, in retrospective, we could question some of his absolute statements here, with all the respect to his good Jewish heart, that represents the good Jewish DNA. Oy va'avoy, im 10,000 mechablim mehavim sakana l'Yisrael. He says, if 10,000, releasing of 10,000 terrorists is a danger to Israel, that's terrible. We should flip signs that seem as weakness to power. For me, that Nagmashim and Aza were exploded, it was clear that we will bring the soldiers home, and even though they were dead. This is something that I didn't even consider. When I did this military operation to find and release the parts of the body, 2 of my soldiers were killed. That was terrible. And then Arik Sharon, the prime minister, called me. She ran to me, my officer, and told me, Rosh HaMamshala wants you. now he's not even a aloof, he's an ugdonel. Prime Minister wants you. I picked up the phone. He told me, listen to me. Now listen to Arik Sharon, because Arik Sharon was extreme and crazy about doing everything to release people. He even paid for Elchanan Tenenbaum. I'm not talking to you like a prime minister to a commander of Ugda. How do you say Ugda? That's like a big unit. Like, I'm talking to you, looks into Arik Sharon, like a Samal Machlaka, even not an officer, that is lying down injured in Latrun, that's in 48, and is not sure that people will come to release him. Meaning Sharon here is influenced, and he says it openly, by his own personal experience as a wounded soldier, hoping that someone will release him in Latrun. And then he says, you are the one. And then he raised his voice, Arik Sharon, and he told Zakkai, you should return everyone home, live or dead. You are establishing now and determining now what is the ethos of this army. Okay? And then Zakkai says, for me, to give 3,000, 5,000, or even 10,000 terrorists for Gilad Shalit, this is not a strategic question. The state of Israel could face it. Real leadership should take the painful price that we will have to pay, and to Tavka make out of it strength. To say to the enemies, we're not like you. For us, we measure life differently. We have all the moral justification to send soldier to a battle, and we will never abandon them. And now he says this very tragic sentence: Eize sakana yesh po lemedinat Israel What risk is here for the state of Israel? Klum. So Zakkai was wrong in his assessment. Now we could know that for sure. The deal that he's preaching here of Gilad Shalit did cost lives. But I did bring his voice here, and it was important for me to bring his voice in order that this source sheet will be balanced in the sense that we see on the one hand Vigoda and others, Rav Kaminetsky and Vigoda, saying, look, this is a war, and therefore we should not do deals. I'm just saying it. And you see here a very, very brave top general. By the way, even slightly right-wing in his political views, Zakkai, echoing the ethos of Arik Sharon, that the ethos of an IDF, of a Jewish army, is that you never abandon soldiers. Never. And I think both have roots. And the answer, the real thing is to balance all the points, and that's what the government is authorized to do. Making considerations of national morale, of how to win a war, of the Jewish ethos that we have arvis and we care about our brothers, but not risking our national security. All of these things should be taken into account. Okay, have a good vacation.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kannai, for the fascinating and topical shiurim, and to all of you for coming and making the Beit Midrash worthwhile this year. And there's one more shiur now, Rabbi Solomon. Thank you.